Hey everyone and welcome. We're about to go down to my wormery to feed a couple of my bins. But before we do so, I just figured we'd check in on my tracking spreadsheet like we do from time to time. Just to give you a sense of where we're at and what we're planning to do. The bins that I was interested in checking in on today were the ones that we actually fed 3 days ago. It's these right here. And they're only 3 days, but what we fed there was primarily watermelon and coffee. So I'm wondering, just curiosity, after 3 days of a good, generous watermelon feeding, what are we going to see in there? I'm just curious to see that after 3 days, what it is that's going on those watermelon chunks that were fed. And I guess the main bulk of what I want to do today is deal with these older bins of mine. The oldest of which is now 169 days, and the other one which is now at day 140 in age. You can see over here on the spreadsheet, I kind of try to keep track of the horizontal feedings, and what I was intending to do today here on the 14th of August is do horizontal feeding number 3, and on this occasion this is 69 days after the previous horizontal feeding occurred. So here you can see there was 20 days lapsed since horizontal feeding number 1 was, and horizontal feeding number 1 occurred at the point where the bin was at age 80. I did let a fair amount of time, 69 days, so I guess, geez, a couple months pass since the last horizontal feeding, and for that matter, I've already dismissed the column that shows when the last feeding of this bin was. That's hidden over here somewhere. The last feeding of this bin actually occurred 3 weeks ago today, 21 days ago. And that's what I mean by wind down. I've been trying to allow time for the worms to really work their way through the material, not get any fresh food, but try to break down whatever's still remaining in there. And I figured it might be time now to really give this wind down a push and try to start rounding up the worms into one particular side of the bin. And that's what's going to take us back to the horizontal migration approach. So, oops. Sorry about that. So yeah, without further ado, let's go on downstairs to the wormery. I'll go to the refrigerator first, grab some food. Yeah, let's go ahead and get started. So now, in advance of getting to work on this, what I've done here is I've taken these 2 containers, which were actually set up as domes over the 2 older bins, to sort of create a little bit of a terrarium effect. And I've already removed all the wandering worms that were hanging out on that lid, and the exposure to light here should also drive any remaining worms that are hanging out on the walls here down into the material. So that's a little bit of primer before we set these up to be in horizontal migration number 3. But like I said earlier, why don't we take a peek at these bins that were fed 3 days earlier and see how they're making progress on the watermelon that they were given. Okay, so we'll just shed a little bit of light on the situation, turn on these additional overhead lamps so we can see what's happening. And the other thing that's been happening down here is an attempt to try to deal with some creepy crawly critters, which we believe are mites. Maybe 1 or 2 here and there. I believe I can see 3 of them. Definitely not like we've seen in the past. So I believe the last thing that we did with these guys was we kind of cover all the visible creepy crawlies that were in here with diatomaceous earth. So perhaps, oh, what's this? Alright, so now we're seeing something. Now we could see some activity kicking up over here. But it does seem like me kicking up things here a bit did reveal them, or their activity. It's very hard to see them. But maybe by me doing this, I've also kind of exposed them to the diatomaceous earth, which probably isn't going to do them much good. Probably ain't going to be happy about that. Alright, let's move on. Alright, so like I said, these bins were fed 3 days ago. The only aim here is to take a peek at how things are progressing with that last feeding. So I don't want to go too crazy. I'm just curious to see you know, what sort of progress 3 days yields, especially with a really delectable food source such as watermelon. The one major observation I'm able to make here for sure is the moisture level across the top. Definitely seeing a fair amount of moisture, which is understandable since watermelon was the food used. And the amount of worms to be seen here are also quite significant. As far as the watermelon rinds themselves, there were a few layers of things placed on here. There was some, here's some paper towel, some coffee onto the rinds themselves. But you can see a little bit of mold developing here, a little bit of white mold. Worms kind of working down the remaining red fleshy part of the rind, at least on that piece. And let's just take a quick peek at this piece over here. Yeah, on this one too, seems like they're working it pretty good. So we're definitely seeing a nice nice jumble of activity down here in the feeding zone. So it looks like the watermelon is popular. Definitely creating a stir here in the feeding zone. What we're seeing here is more or less sort of the expected result. So we'll just return things to the way they were on this bin, and we'll get the other one to take a peek on that one really quick as well. Same story with the diatomaceous earth and the little creepy crawly bugs. However, on this bin, I believe we had no luck spotting any the last time we were examining this paper. And I'm pleased to say that that's more or less the same story still. Okay. Now here I can see a little bit more of a divot in terms of, you know, the food being consumed and the level of the material dropping down as a result of that. I mean, naturally they're leaving behind castings, but I believe that really does end up being a much more dense material than just the food itself that they're consuming. All right, there's the cork. We'll keep it in the middle. I'm not going to go pulling too much stuff up or out. We'll just see if we can find a piece of melon. It really seems like they're, oh, okay, down here. Maybe it's just a matter of digging further. Yeah, okay, so here too you could see little traces of white. This is another piece, but in this case they've really stripped it down to not much more than the skin anymore. So they're really working that piece down significantly. So I guess one other thing that we fed in these two bins, we didn't see it in the other one, so we didn't go looking for it either, was this stuff over here. This white stuff is quinoa, cooked quinoa. So it's just it's a grain, and it was to be used in a recipe which was sort of a project that fizzled out. So the cooked quinoa was just sitting in the refrigerator, and it seemed time to do away with it. And the idea here was to see if the worms like it. So I believe just by kind of disrupting it now, it's really not just a pile of quinoa anymore. It's sort of just blended in with the rest of the food items. But maybe next time we check in on these bins, we'll have a better sense of how that stuff did by examining the other bin where we didn't disrupt the quinoa. So, all right, let's proceed with setting up horizontal migration number 3 on my two oldest bins. On the first of the bins, you'll see that I've got some newspaper here resting on top. Take all of the material and push it off to the side and create ourselves a nice, beefy, new environment for them. Not just our horizontal feeding where we throw a little bit of food down and hope they come that way. I'm going to do what I've done in the past, is I'm going to actually place a barrier in here, made out of cardboard. And then behind that barrier, we're going to have that new environment, which is going to be intended to lure them out of this nearly finished compost. I mean, for that matter, I would almost consider this as finished compost. Alright, so I'm just going to start mounding up the material here on one side. Trying to create a nice opening on the other side. You can see an abundant number of worms throughout the material. So this has not been fed in 3 weeks. So it's almost, I don't know, it's hard to tell where the last feeding zone really was. I've not been maintaining any record of that formally. I'm sure if I went back to the video I could probably somehow figure out which side of the bin it was, but at this point it's neither here nor there as far as I'm concerned. Usually when I'm doing horizontal migrations, I'll usually set up the new one on the opposite side of where the previous one had been. But like I said, it's been 3 weeks since it was fed, so any remnants of food in that last horizontal migration feeding zone was probably long gone at this point. So it's really nothing fancy, but like I said, I'm setting up sort of a barrier. So I just took a couple pieces of cardboard. One of them comes not quite all the way over, and the other one will also not make it quite all the way across. But together they've created a decent enough barrier that we can set up their new environment in on the opposite side, and then we'll backfill the rest of the material. And for that matter, I'm not even going to bother perforating this because they can get under it and around it no problem. And then eventually, hopefully, they'll start making their way into this new space that we've set up for them. Now, some of the materials I'm going to be using to set up this this new space for them is cardboard, packed up cardboard pieces as a bedding material on the bottom. Okay, that's pretty good. Now, in addition to that, I'm adding some leaves. Seems to me like a nice bedding of leaves and cardboard should make for a pretty cozy spot for them to retreat down into if they're not necessarily in the mood for feeding at the time. Now, the food itself is going to consist of things that are fairly favored by the worms, sweet, delectable stuff such as cantaloupe rinds over here, in addition to some banana peel covered up with some coffee grinds. Alrighty. Now on top of that, we're going to sprinkle in some pulverized eggshell as grit. And as a topper, I plan to use leaves, just since some of the items used as food in here are the sort of things that could attract flying insects. Nothing fancy. And then the only other thing to do here is to backfill the barrier with the soon-to-be finished compost material. The compost material has got a really nice moisture level to it. I'm presuming because of that nice terrarium effect that we had that kept all the moisture down in the bin. Okay, so now I'm just going to put this covering back on top, and now we're set to proceed to the second bin to give it the same treatment. Okay. The aim here is to do the same exact thing to this bin on this side over here. So we'll just proceed with making space for the new horizontal migration. Now normally I probably would have agitated this material and sort of aerated all of it throughout, not only on this side but on the opposite side. But something I did off camera a couple days ago was I came down here and I did actually stir up this material to get mixed up a little bit. Take any of the material that was at the bottom, bring it to the top. So it's only because of that I'm not bothering with that now, because it's already been done. But normally I would, you know, I would feel like the material that's been sitting at the bottom of a bin for 3 weeks without being touched would probably benefit from getting a little bit of aeration, a little bit of agitation. So that is something I took care of in both of these bins a few days ago. Okay, here again, just a couple pieces of cardboard fashioned to sort of stand up as a barrier. Just drop a little bit of fill behind it to help it stand and stay in place while I build the new horizontal migration feeding zone in here. Same as we did before, laying in some cardboard. Nice little bit of leafy matter as well as their bedding down here. And we'll drop in the remainder of the banana peels. And cantaloupe rinds. Any worm should find this downright delectable. Okay, and what we'll do now is what we did before, is top all that food off with some spent coffee grinds. Great. Again, we're going to include some grit. And last but not least, we'll just use the remainder of what leaves are in this box to cover up. I would think that that's enough. In the past, I've always had pretty good luck with migrating the worms using this method. Sort of creating a barrier, interested worms make their way over, drawn to the food and to the moisture, and generally the barrier prevents them from wandering away, so it does tend to help congregate the worms nicely on the new side where the feedings are occurring. And in the end, hopefully we'll end up with somewhat depopulated castings on this side over here. As you can see, this is pretty heavily populated stuff, so we want to start moving the worms out so we can eventually harvest the castings. Okay. Nothing much more to do here other than cover up the, put the bin back up on the shelf and cover up with the terrarium effect lids over the top. So I'll take care of the rest of that off camera. So with that, I'll say goodbye, and thanks for keeping me company. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. I always appreciate that. And also consider subscribing to the channel. That's appreciated as well. All right, everyone, have a great day. Bye now.